Partway through the 1963 model year, Mercury would introduce the Marauder that you see here, this kind of semi-fastback coupe that was supposed to be a performance vehicle for those who wanted something that was both luxurious as well as sporty. And you can tell it's sporty because it has that checkered flag emblem up on the front fender, just over top of the Marauder script. And this generation Marauder would continue on through the 1965 model year before it would be dropped, and the S55 would become the top sporty Mercury in the lineup. But for 1969, Mercury decided to revive the Marauder nameplate, and again for a brief period in time, 1969 and 1970, the second generation Marauder brought back the sport and luxury to the Mercury lineup. Now, what in the world was Mercury trying to do in terms of the Marauder, and why did it think that there was a market for this? Well, you have to think that the Marauder kind of slotted in above the Mercury Cougar, which was highly popular at this time, selling around a couple 100,000 units per year, and it slotted beneath the Lincoln Mark III, kind of this big personal luxury coupe that also was highly successful, but was definitely not selling a couple 100,000 units per year. It was selling in the mid 20,000 units per year in that zip code, but very successful. And it was a little bit above and sportier than the Ford Thunderbird. So it was kind of this tweener car that I think one of the reasons why it was never that successful and only sold 15,000 units in its first year and about a third of that in the second year, 1970, is that people didn't really quite know what to do with it. It was kind of a sporty car, but also luxurious and not so sporty in some ways that we'll talk about. And it certainly looked cool, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're just going to discuss it today, because it's cool looking. And the car we're actually going to discuss is this 1970 Marauder, and this is not an X100. So for those who don't know, there was the Marauder, and then there was the X100, which was the sporty version of the Sporty Coupe. Don't quite get it, but that's what it was. This is just a standard Marauder that is not an X100. And for 1970, one of the easiest ways to tell the 1970 model year Marauder is that it has that block lettering spelling out Marauder on the front, as opposed to the Lincoln Mercury badge, which you saw on the previous 1969 model Marauder, and that one was an X100. And as we rotate around to this front three-quarter view of the Marauder, we can see a number of styling features. The Marauder borrowed kind of that marquee front end, but certainly has a different rear end and is different from the door back. It also rode atop a different wheelbase. The Marauder rode atop a 121-inch wheelbase. If you got the Mercury Marquis, it rode atop a 124-inch wheelbase. And the 121-inch wheelbase was shared with another one of the Marauder's competitors, the Ford XL, kind of this fastbacky Ford coupe. So I guess Ford was into this sporty, luxurious-y, I don't know what kind of coupe phase during this time frame, but oh well. Now, one of the things that you can see here is aft of the door, you have that Coke bottle styling. We talked about the Coke bottle styling on Pontiacs. Well, here you have it on a Mercury, where that rear quarter panel flares outboard at the wheel, and also it kind of flares upward and downward at the same time. So this is a Coke bottle car, just like those mid-60s Pontiacs, but here Mercury is using it, perhaps because it was so popular on Pontiacs. And you've got kind of the semi-fastback roofline. We will take a greater look at that in more detail as we rotate around to the rear of the car, because there's something special about it. As I mentioned, this is not an X100. You do not see an X100 badge on the front fender. This is just the standard Marauder, which came with the 390 cubic inch V8 as opposed to the 429 cubic inch V8 standard, because you had to have economy in your performance car. And as we rotate around to this rear three-quarter view, you can see kind of the signature of the Marauder, and that is the flying buttresses, the flying buttress C-pillars that kind of flow just ever so gently into becoming the top of the quarter panels. And you have the bright work molding that trims out the top of the quarter panel as well. And of course, the tail panel here that with the tail lights has the 3-element Mercury-style tail lamp. I don't know where Mercury quite borrowed that from. Lincoln also had those 3-element style tail lamps. That was something that, for whatever reason, connoted luxury, even back to the 1958 Impala on the Chevrolet that had 3 taillights. But here, Mercury did it, I think, because Lincoln was also doing it during this time frame. For instance, the new for 1970 full-size Lincoln Continental had that three tail lamp theme out back. That, of course, was not a sporty car. That was a big, luxurious automobile. And, well, the Marauder gave you a little bit of a tinge of that. And as we rotate to the dead-on rear view, you can see that three tail lamp theme almost is like a four tail lamp theme with the reverse lights. And then you have the Marauder nameplate in the middle, the Lincoln Mercury badge above that. That is the Lincoln Mercury crest, that red crest that is the trunk lock cover on these. Now, I have to say that the dead-on rear view kind of makes this look like a Ranchero or an El Camino, something like that, because it looks like you almost should have a pickup bed back here, the way the roof is styled, but you don't. You have a regular deck lid and a trunk. And you can also see what I was talking about the Coke bottle styling. Notice the sheet metal and how it flares outboard around those rear wheels, and then it tucks back in as it kind of comes rearward. The other nice thing about the rear is that you have that piece of bright work that goes all the way around the car, up around trims out the edge of the vinyl roof on top of the roof there, and then comes down and forms the top of the quarter panel. And then that is continued in the bumper styling. So Ford did a really nice job, I think, with this particular rear end. But like I said, it does looks a little bit to me like a Ranchero back end, if you didn't quite know what you were looking at. As we turn to the inside, because this is the standard Marauder, you just have the standard bench seat. So not a very sporty car, and you can imagine that the limiting factor in terms of how fast you could go around a corner was nothing related to the suspension. That was not limiting the handling ability of the car. It actually was whether or not you could keep your butt in the seat and not slip all over the place on this slick vinyl seat. These Mercurys did lean quite a bit, and I have to say, I have tried to drive them sportingly in some cases, and you better have the window rolled down and your left hand grabbing onto the A-pillar there, because otherwise you are going to go all over this seat. It's just not going to keep you in place. There is no support in any direction. So just be prepared for that, but I guess that kind of makes it cool and gives you a newfound respect for the individuals who drove these cars in movies and kind of helped them fly around corners. And one of the things I have to say that I like about these particular Marauders is the dash theme. I do like just this very clean, linear look. You have the faux wood grain, but it does look convincing. Ford always did nice wood grain as opposed to General Motors and sometimes Chrysler. It actually looks at home in a car like this. And you have the standard Ford two-spoke wheel. You also have the little gear shift there that was employed on cars like the Lincoln Mark III. And these cars have a gear shift that you have to be careful about. Don't leave your Ford, I would say prior to 1973-ish, running in park with the engine on, because they were known for shifting out of park. In fact, that was a recall that Ford had, and somehow they were able to just satisfy the recall with a sticker that they sent out to everybody that effectively said, don't let your car idle in park, and that was a big problem. You would think that you could let it idle in park and then put the parking brake on, but quite a few Fords actually had an automatic parking brake release when the car would go into reverse or any forward gear. And so if you had the parking brake on, the car slipped into reverse, which was typically what happened, the parking brake would release and would do absolutely nothing to keep the car in place. Now, one of the great features that you got on your Fords of this era was a super deep well trunk, as you can see here. This was something that would help store a ton of luggage and golf bags or whatever you wanted back there. Some people loved it, some people hated it. And why would you hate something like this with a ton of storage capacity? Well, you can imagine if you had groceries and you're putting them in the trunk, it's kind of hard to get them in and out of the trunk. You really have to bend over in order to pick them up. And so that was something that people didn't like, but if you were a Ford buyer, you liked it. It was one of the reasons why you bought Fords, and even the Panther platform cars that were produced all the way through the 2000s had this kind of a setup. Now, this car has that fuel tank that's mounted vertically, which is one of the reasons why the fuel fill door is on the driver's side as opposed to behind the license plate. So it also did help with crashworthiness, but it really was there just to help provide a deep well trunk. Ford did a lot of interesting things with trunks during the era on some of the vehicles even, like the Mustangs. The top of the gas tank was the bottom of the trunk. So don't put a battery on your Mustang trunk if that's the case. And now here's where it starts to get interesting, and that is the powertrain department for the Marauder. This particular one has the standard 390 cubic inch 2 Venturi or 2-barrel V8 that made 265 horsepower. Like I said, it's kind of strange that on their Sporty Mercury that Ford would have the standard engine be a 390 cubic inch 2-barrel engine. It just seems antithetical to me, but they did, and that was the standard engine in the Marauder. There was an optional 429 cubic inch 2 Venturi V8 that made 320 horsepower. And then the top engine was the 429 cubic inch V8 with the 4 Venturi or 4-barrel carburetor that made 360 gross horsepower. That lattermost engine was standard in the X100, but it was not standard in any of the other Marauders. It was optional, though. So it really is quite interesting to me that the Marauder was kind of this dichotomy of a sporty vehicle, but not quite. If you wanted the sporty variant, you had to get the X100. And if you just got the standard Marauder, you kind of got the looks, but you didn't get really the, let's say, under-hood power. A 2-barrel carburetor, come on, in a sporty car, especially these Ford 2-barrel carburetors where they're a little wheezy, particularly at the upper RPM range. And that 390 2 Venturi engine wasn't even a higher compression engine. It just was kind of a standard run-of-the-mill economy type motor. But that's what this one has, and that's what came standard in the Marauder, and I guess people found it to be just fine, or maybe they didn't, and that's part of the reason why the Marauder wasn't a great seller. As I mentioned, in 1970, it sold about 5,000 units. That really was it, and I think, again, it was just buyer confusion in terms of what kind of a car is this? Is it a sporty car? Is it a luxury car? Is it a family car? Is it a pickup, given the rear end looks that I just mentioned? I think people were overall confused by it, and that's probably the reason why it didn't sell. So what are your thoughts on the 1969 to 1970 Marauder? It's interesting that it kind of went back out to pasture. The nameplate was not used all the way until the Mercury Marauder would kind of come back briefly in the 2000s. But aside from that, the Marauder was an extinct species, and I think that was just because it didn't sell. By the way, one of the great things about the Marauder, as you can see in this particular photo, is that it could be equipped with fender skirts because your sporty vehicle clearly needs fender skirts on it. I think it's a handsome car. I really would like to own one. I don't have one of these, but, oh well, maybe someday one will come along and there will be garage space yet again. But until that point in time, I'm happy with what I have. Thanks again for watching. Put a comment about the Marauder in the comment section.